So my name is Carolyn Halpin-Healy. I'm the executive director of Arts&Minds, and I'm based in New York. And our organization is one of those that exists outside the museum between the practice of medicine and the practice of museum work. So Christina, thank you for inviting me to be here and meet with Wendy and all of you. Wendy, looking at the website and hearing what you had to say this morning about Hello Future, it's hugely exciting to anticipate this transformation. But you also made it very clear that it's based on a long history of both of the work of the museum and you yourself personally. So I'm very curious about your beginnings as a nurse and how that might be a thread that's run all the way through, or that is maybe looping back. How is that foundation affecting you in your work?
I think it's that element, root around care and creativity, and I see that those two things always working together. When I was working in the health sector and working with doctors and surgeons, many of the surgeons that you work with are highly creative people. With really, some of the skills are so similar to that of artists. We're currently working with an artist at the moment. She's in residence here at the museum, Lucy Bursko, and she's working on a project called Dab Hands. It's looking at the dexterity in people's hands and how perhaps in today's day and age people are losing those skills because they're not doing crafts the same at school. People work on a typewriter now and not so much with handwriting. But looking at the skill of an artist and that of a surgeon, particularly plastic surgeons as well, or when they're doing that intricate surgery, I think there's creativity in both fields, and I don't think creativity lies in the sole field of the arts either. It spreads across all disciplines, creativity. But I also, when I was doing my nurse training and prior to that, I'd worked in an old people's home. And so from a very young age, I'd seen how people living with dementia in particular had been viewed as people that are lacking or have lost things. It's more like that deficit model, as opposed to looking at them as active citizens and perceiving them that way and what they can do and what they can contribute to society. And they were very often, people living with dementia were locked away in rooms, and people, I think it was called malignant social psychology, in terms of the way in which they were cared for, although the intention was very good of nurses and the carers, actually had a really detrimental effect on people living with dementia. They were, people kind of answer for them and would talk about them in front of them. And I think we've come a long way in terms of understanding that, people living with dementia can really have a massive contribution, make a massive contribution. And also in terms of what museums and art galleries and the arts, culture and health can offer these people, it's a chance to express themselves, be part of a group, to remove that stigma perhaps they may have of living with dementia, and to be welcomed. And it's very much about living in the moment. I know that many of the programmes that we have delivered for people living with dementia and the carers, I will often get asked, well, what's the point of teaching them new skills or new art skills if they're going to forget? And it's like, well, actually, in the moment, it's about being in that moment and the quality of their life in that moment. And although they may return home or to the hospital or care homes, wherever they are, and they may have forgotten what they have been taught, they will not have forgotten the emotional feeling, because you do not lose that with dementia. So you may not understand why you're feeling happy and warm, but if that in that moment experience they can be made to feel valued and have a quality to experience. So there was one program we worked on called Beyond Dementia, and it was a 3-year program, and it still has a legacy afterwards. And I think what we realised is, or what I'd really realised in my role at the time, which was Arts and Health Partnership Manager, was there are real challenges for people living with dementia in actually just getting to the museum, never mind anything else. And then if you're trying to run a programme, how do they remember what to bring? And it became apparent to me that we really needed a coordinator outside of the museum who was either professionally trained or had worked with that community group or charity or service provider, that could be that link worker between the two. So when we were forming and putting the project together, we actually costed that in. It was really important that we had made the budget for that. And also, we never planned more than 3 weeks ahead. It was quite challenging, but it was in order to be responsive to the group. What were they interested in? Did they want to work with clay? Did they want to do printmaking? Did they want to do photography? And for them to understand that it may take people living with dementia longer to express what it is that they would like to do. And the whole idea of this programme is that they would be able to engage with the art gallery and the museum spaces. They would have access to the experts, so it wouldn't be, perhaps a junior person. It would be the experts that they got to talk to about the artworks. When we have the teas and coffees and the refreshment part, because that's the social bit, it's about being in a group, rather than keeping them aside in a room, we took them up into our beautiful cafe spaces. And it became a real special event for them. And that, for us, it was a huge learning curve for all our museum educators, curators, and even the cafe staff and the shop staff really learned. And we've built in training for the staff. We've got dementia friends here in the UK. I'm sure it's out in different European countries as well.
Okay. I would ask you if you have devised, although I understand that you have really an ongoing way of programming, never too much ahead of time, but have you devised any form of let's say evaluation of the impact of your activities?
So there has been a programme, I've got it here with me, called Not So Grim Up North. You see it?
Super.
It's very in-house.
I want it.
Very in-country.
Break the glass of the video and pass it to me.
Yeah, so that was a collaboration between the Whitworth Manchester Museum, UCL, which is University of Central London, and Tyne and Wear museums. Tyne and Wear have done some amazing work with people living with dementia. And for us, we were hoping to focus the work on that we were doing in the hospital around the impact. Sadly, it became really, really difficult in terms of getting the consents, the ethical consents, because the clinical staff were, they had different priorities.
Yes.
As a result of the work that we delivered in the hospital, there was a really forward and progressive thinking director of nursing. And she obviously had a set budget to bring in what we call some of the agency staff that would support nurses on complex health needs wards, particularly when they had people living with dementia coming onto the ward, because they could become disorientated, that their behaviours could be more challenging. So this money was used to bring in service, agency staff who basically, they were they would sit at the edge of the ward to make sure they didn't escape. They were generally on the phone. They didn't really engage with the patients. And so this director of nursing decided she was going to use this money and set up, well, she created, and it's actually grown, but at the time, this was 7 years ago, 10 therapeutic arts and activity coordinators within the hospital. Because it was great us going in, but you kind of parachute in and trying to do that person-centred care as a museum or galleries doing that. It's time-intensive, resource-intensive. You can't build up those relationships. And so she used her budgets because she could see the impact it had, and she wanted to obviously grow this. And so now what we do is we invest our time in training and supporting these arts and therapeutic activity coordinators. And so what we did, I'm just, here it is, got it here. Together we created this cultural.
Yes, that's fascinating. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, so it's got all sorts of activity, and you don't have to be a professional artist or musician to actually deliver these activities. And basically we did it in sheet form, so that if an occupational therapist or a nurse was discharging a patient, they would understand what the patient's interests were, and then they could, you know, it's a bit overwhelming to go home and to be expected to do all those activities, but they could pick out certain ones that might help with mobility. It may help with just general well-being for people, and stimulation. And then, as I say, we've just added another 10 outdoor activities so that people can connect to nature as well. But these packs can be used by carers, they can be used by family members, they can be used in a clinical context, and it's really step by step. It explains what materials you need, and we've obviously been really conscious about making sure that those are things that can be sourced easily, that possibly you've got them in your home already. And at the moment, because we've just added the nature ones, we are looking now to see if we can actually do some rigorous evaluation and to see the impact of the use of the cultural first aid kit.
Wendy, could you show us an example of one of those sheets in the kit?
Yeah.
And take us through it?
Yeah. So we do give an introduction, and we also talk about the Art Med programme, which is the training for staff, and the content. So I'm just going to pick one of the exercises out. So this is for the music experience. So we give a general introduction, so tips for engaging with the patient. Mm-hmm. And then we go on to the music exercises. Mm-hmm. And on this one, this would be it could be for a family member to do a care, in a care home, occupational health, or nurse. And they would write in guidance notes for the patient, and then for the patient to then write some of their feedback. So the guidance notes would be telling them which things to pick out of the pack. So here's the pack here. Mm-hmm. And this one tells you, what the contents are in each of the categories. Mm-hmm. And then moving on to an exercise. So exercise 1. So it's walking to the beat. And there you can see, mm-hmm. and it basically, step by step, takes you through. So it gives the aim to regulate gait, support muscle development, reduce falls. This can be completed with crutches, walking frames, as well as without. You will need either an online music player, a radio, iTunes speakers, or headphones. And then it's let's get started. And it's basically a step by step by step by step. Mm-hmm. These are music ones, but we have others that relate more to our objects. So you can use that for storytelling within the museum. I see the cultural first aid kit as something that can just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And it's about what you want to, add to it, basically. As I say, at the moment, we're just working with some of our faculties here, the research faculty, because just over the road, we have our nursing and medical faculty. And that's where I did a postgraduate diploma in dementia care. This was while I was at the museum. The National Health Service, they actually funded it for me. So they are looking for people outside the clinical medical sector to engage with mental health interventions, dementia care. So I do feel that there is a really big move, even within the health sector, to understand about looking at patients and people a lot more holistically, and looking at the value that the arts and creativity can bring to people, basically their recovery as well as their well-being.
Yeah, it's so exciting. It really is. I always feel as if the UK is just so far ahead on this kind of thinking about really bringing together the healthcare sector and the museum and arts sector. So it's really a great model. Wendy, oh, go ahead. I was going to ask you about the belonging gallery that seems to come out of this.
Yeah. I was just going to show you, we also, when we were working in the hospital, very often, and particularly with people living with dementia and older people, they get what we call it touch hunger or skin hunger. And it's basically, we're humans, we need that interaction, we want to touch one another. And for very often, particularly with older people as well, maybe the only time they get touched is if when they're being bathed or lifted into a bath or onto a commode, and it's like tactile. They don't get that opportunity, and in clinical environments in particular, it's very sterile. So we work with an artist who basically upcycles, I don't know if you can see, everyday objects, and they are really, really tactile pieces that are collage. There's a whole range of them that I have here, which again we take into care homes, clinical spaces as well, and just actually for certain people just to be able to play with these beautiful objects is really special for them. Sorry, you were asking me, was it the Belonging Gallery?
Yeah, the Belonging Gallery.
So that's going to be one of our new galleries. And so I think it's the first role of its type. We appointed a curator of Indigenous perspectives, Alexandra Alberta, and she's co-curating this gallery along with a whole number of community members from across the city. Many of these would have been given asylum seeker or refugee seeker status. Also in Manchester, we have, I think it's in excess of 250 different languages. So we're a really multicultural city. We have a demographic of, I think it's around 15% of South Asia, of people of South Asian heritage as well. And we wanted to explore this idea of belonging. And so when you enter, once we reopen, once you enter Manchester Museum, the first permanent gallery that you arrive at is the Belonging Gallery. And we are using, in terms of how to interpret the gallery and the stories and the objects that we want to tell, we're doing that through comic strip, basically. So working with a range of different artists to explore what belonging means, particularly in a colonial museum. Well, the colonial history. And it really, in a way, it welcomes people. It's really accessible because I think because of the use of comic strips as well. So it's almost like a universal language that we would be using. And it prepares people for going then on into our Chinese culture gallery, then on into our South Asia gallery, which has been quite unique in the way that that's been curated. So we're working with a core group of, I think it's 33 community members that have been with us now for past 3 years. And initially they came on board as volunteers who were really passionate. So it's about their lived experience. And they wanted to share that with us. And so initially, I think the first 6 months it was as volunteers, but they are all paid now for their time and for their contribution. We pay them at Arts Council rates as well. And so rather than the South Asia Gallery be curated in that traditional way of, you know, a chronological telling of history from most likely a white male middle class man. We started with what were the stories that this group of people wanted to share? What were their lived experiences? Which, I'll be honest with you, the designers that we were working with really struggled with that, because that isn't the way designers who work for museums work. They start with the objects and they work around that. So the first set of designers that we were working with, sadly we had to part ways because it just really wasn't working. But thankfully now we are working with designers that do understand and have really got to grips with this way of co-curating. And what we're doing is, so it's a series of anthologies. So there'll be one around trade, there's one around music and the arts, there's one around migration, and within these there's 6 anthologies altogether. And then in the centre of the gallery there will be a performance space as well. So we're very excited about this. It has been challenging because working that way, it does take much more time. It's also about relationship management. You know, there are some really strong characters within the collective, and it's managing how everybody, you know, wants their voices heard, and keeping them throughout the journey. So it's not just about them co-curating the exhibitions, but it's also how they would like to program the performance space as well.
Yes, of course. So this question of belonging and 250 languages, how will that work with your communities with dementia?
So, well, an inclusive museum, we have different ways of just sharing the information. So for people living with dementia, certainly when we welcome them into the galleries, and it's understanding with any condition, there is a spectrum, you know, so somebody with early onset dementia, and there's different types of dementia as well. So it's about understanding some of the needs of those people, and then actually tailoring their visits to suit their needs. So at the moment, while we are, in terms of our furniture for the spaces, even what floor coverings that we're going to have, certain types of dementia, if you have a black mat or a dark mat on the floor, they would perceive it as a whole. So we've done some consultation with some dementia-friendly groups who have looked. We'll never get everything perfect, but there will be areas of the museum that would be suitable for them to feel comfortable and welcomed as well. It's always a work in progress.
Always. It's so exciting, though. I hope I get to visit one day.
I do too.
Yeah. So,
Carolyn, where is it? You said you were based. You're out in America, aren't you?
I am. I'm in New York.
In New York. Well, yeah. I one of the programs that really inspired our first program for people living with dementia, which was Coffee, Cake and Culture, and that was inspired by the Meet Me at MoMA.
Yeah, they inspired many people all around the world, including me and my organization. Did they come and provide training in Manchester?
Well, strangely enough, I met them when I was in Australia. I'm trying to remember.
Oh, yes. That was,
I can't remember the lady.
It wasn't Lauren. It was, I can see her face.
Yeah, if you said her name, it would come.
Yeah.
It's gone now, but it was in Canberra at the time. And
Yeah.
she was sharing the work that they were doing, and actually they set up a session. But what we wanted to offer was not solely the art appreciation and looking at the art or the artifacts, but it was about them being able to engage in and participate in some of the creative workshops, but also the opportunity to co-curate an exhibition. So we, together with one of the groups, Together Dementia Support, they had a group called the Fabulous Forgetful Friends. And this was a group of people that were quite passionate in terms of how they wanted to advocate for themselves out in the public. You know, they were happy to go out and talk to people about the condition and really wanting to change people's attitudes. So they seemed like the perfect group to work with us to develop an exhibition, which we called Beyond Dementia. And we created this little handbook, which again,
that's beautiful.
You can get online, and it talks about the whole process of putting the exhibition together, and that it's not just museum people's voices in here. It's also those living with dementia and how they selected the artworks for the exhibition. And the exhibition ran for nearly a year. It was initially 6 months, but it was so well received we extended. And parts of that exhibition now is in Trafford General Hospital.
Oh, what a beautiful project. Was it, let me ask you about that interest. Was it across the general public? Was everybody interested, or was it?
We have huge interest from it, from not just medical and clinical and nurses, etc., from just general public, and the feedback. Well, we had a whole training program wrapped around it and lots of engagement programs as well. And because it was really people sharing their personal stories also. So it was really special.
It sounds amazing. Now you're in a special position as a university museum. And so are you also involving university students in your work?
Yes. Yeah. So many of those. So when we do twice a year. We haven't done it through COVID, but prior to COVID, we would run 2 sessions a year, which were training sessions for medical students, nursing students, health professionals, and it would be a day-long program. We would start in the morning with something that was very clinical, because it was their comfort zone, and it would be. We would invite a lecturer, professor that would talk around an area of dementia care. And as the day progressed, it would become more art focused or more focused on, the cultural objects. And the students themselves and the health professionals themselves would engage in lots of the different activities that we provided for people living with dementia. As I say, we did that twice a year, but sadly, with COVID, we've been able to do that, and our health professionals, I'm afraid, haven't had the time they've had to focus on what's going on in the hospitals, really, and the care of the patients.
Yeah, but it's so important to be able to influence the students. I mean, in the US, I don't know what the situation is in Italy or in the UK, but in the US, we have a shortage of geriatricians and neurologists. So when we can bring medical students into contact with people with dementia before they're so ill that they are hospitalized, where they normally encounter them for the first time, there's the opportunity for them to really have hope that they might, as clinicians, be able to help people living with dementia.